Oh, that wasn't your life flashing before your eyes. That was me.
Welcome back. Today we're going to glance over the graphical settings of Apex Legends, some bonus settings that may or may not help with performance, and lastly, test the graphical presets with my setup to see how each preset holds up framerate wise. Knowing all that, let's start with the settings themselves. This section is simply about testing out each setting, what it changes, and how much it affects FPS. First option we can change is display mode. Here we have three options to choose from: windowed, borderless window, and full screen. It doesn't change anything about how the game looks, but it gives you the choice between being able to alt-tab easily out of the game or usually gain slightly more FPS. In this case, however, it seems that sometimes you can get a frame or two more using borderless window, though most of the time the frame rate seems the same across the board. For the rest of the testing, I'll be using full screen. Just for fun, I tested the FOV setting to see if sacrificing your vision would yield better performance. Surprisingly, going from 75 degrees to 90 decreased the frame rate by 10 FPS, but going from 90 to 110 degrees only lowered the FPS by 2 frames. So if you're desperate for a few more frames, I guess you could lower your FOV, but I would advise against that. FOV ability scaling alters your view while using some abilities, like Bloodhound's ultimate. It has no effect on the frame rate, so it doesn't matter if you leave it on or off. This next option is only for Nvidia's GPUs, and it's the Nvidia Reflex. You can either disable it, enable it, or boost it. Reflex aligns game engine work to complete just in time for rendering, eliminating the GPU render queue and reducing CPU back pressure in GPU intensive scenes. This should deliver latency reductions. Adding the boost option will try to force the GPU to run at maximum performance all the time, though the option can tweak some other parameters as well, which depend on game-to-game basis. The problem with this setting is that I don't have a proper way to monitor the improvements this brings, since that requires a G-Sync capable monitor. The best I can offer is render latency and average system latency. From personal experience, I don't feel that much of a difference, even with the boost option. Worryingly, it seems to lower performance, so I suggest trying it out on your system, maybe it will help you. Unfortunately, I noticed this as of recording this voiceover, so moving forward, this setting will be set to enabled plus boost, so keep that performance loss in mind. Enabling adaptive resolution requires the TSAA to be selected in the anti-aliasing setting. What the setting does is that it lowers the render scale of your resolution to try to maintain your set frame rate. Basically, you are sacrificing clarity for fluidity in heavy scenes, as seen here. This setting is a savior when you can't hit a stable 60 FPS, but in my case, I don't need it. It could be also useful if you could set it to any frame rate, like 144 or 240. Unfortunately, it's capped to 100. During the testing, I won't be using this setting, so it's going to be set to 0. And speaking of anti-aliasing, you can have it turned off completely or set it to TSAA, which is temporal anti-aliasing. While it does clean up the image quite well, it's not perfect. Since it's temporal, it uses previous frames to remove jagged edges, which causes these kinds of ghosting issues. It has a slight performance hit, but I think it's worth it to have it turned on. And if you plan on using adaptive resolution, then you don't have a choice anyway. Like the name implies, texture streaming budget tells the engine how much VRAM it can use for the textures. The highest resolution possible is the same across all of the presets, so it doesn't matter which one you choose. Even the performance is the same across all of the presets. The only difference is how much memory can be used and how often is it going to stream in higher quality textures. The one exception to this rule is the preset None, which basically sets all of the textures to their lowest quality all of the time, no matter how close you are to them. And unlike all of the other options, this one has a slight performance improvement. So if you are in a desperate need for more FPS than you currently have, then setting it to None will do that. Otherwise, just set it to your VRAM amount or slightly under so you don't run into VRAM overflow issues while using other settings. I chose the Ultra preset since my RTX 3070 has 8 gigs of VRAM. Texture filtering handles how textures look at obscure angles. Setting it to bilinear yields the best performance, but the textures look horrible and blurry. Trilinear doesn't seem to improve things that much. 2 times anisotropic filtering makes a slight difference, and 4 times adds on to that. 8 and 16 times doesn't seem to do much, so I think the best option is the 4 times anisotropic filtering. Ambient occlusion is a screen space effect that creates shadows in occluded areas or on objects that are close to each other. It also has an effect on sun shadows, where objects closer to their shadow make their shadow darker as seen here. Unlike in other games, this effect is not cheap, especially going from off to high. Personally, I would keep this low, since the small improvements in precision and resolution aren't really worth the performance loss. Sun shadow coverage is maybe currently broken.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on.
Sun shadow detail changes the distance where higher res shadows are rendered at. It doesn't make that much of a difference performance-wise, so I suggest keeping it at high. Spot shadow detail handles the quality of shadows from point lights. It affects all static and dynamic lights that cast shadows. I would completely avoid turning them off, since not only does it make the game look worse, you remove character shadows, which could put you at a disadvantage in a combat scenario. It also doesn't affect the performance, so I see no reason to turn it off. Then if you want better shadows, I suggest going up to very high, since that doesn't cost that much to run and looks a lot better. Remember as well that these shadows affect things like character portraits and character screens. The last option, Ultra, is more expensive and way more memory intensive, but in return you get beautiful shadows without almost any pixelation. So if you're that type of person that plays this at 800 by 600p, stretched with the lowest settings possible to feel like a pro gamer, then use the low setting. Otherwise go with very high. And if you have the headroom, then go with Ultra. But remember to maybe lower your VRAM budget so you don't overflow. Volumetric lighting adds in God rays and bloom. For how cheap this setting is, I suggest enabling it, since it reforms how the game looks. Dynamic spot shadows does as it says. It removes any dynamic shadows from spotlights. Sun shadows are of course not affected. Personally, I would avoid this setting since it puts you at a disadvantage, like setting spot shadow detail to off. There's also a funny glitch where if you turn this off while casting a shadow, your shadow disconnects from your body and stays in your original position. To fix this, just turn it back on. Model detail is changing what LODs should be visible at what distances, so the lower the preset is, the more popping you're going to see. Since the performance difference isn't that bad, I would stick to very high. Map detail removes any objects that are purely cosmetical and don't add anything to the gameplay. I personally would keep this on high, but this isn't a bad idea setting this to low and saving some FPS. Effects detail changes how detailed the explosion, gunfire, and other effects are. The difference visually and FPS wise is small, so it doesn't matter that much which one you choose, so set it to high. I also tried out other effects if it had any effect, but it doesn't seem like it. Having impact marks turned on or off doesn't matter that much, since it doesn't change the FPS at all, so keep them at high. Ragdolls changes how long the corpses last before they disappear. Low makes them disappear as soon as they hit the ground, medium and high makes them stay for around 20 seconds before they disappear. High also seems to make the corpse more dynamic than medium, but that could have been random. Performance seems to be the same, so I can't really tell you what should be the best option. It could make a bigger difference where there are multiple corpses, but I'm not able to test that, so just to be safe, set it to medium. One last trick I'll mention is unlocking the frame rate when you are in the menus or when you're in the character selection screen. Typing this into the launch parameters unlocks the frame rate everywhere in the game. This helped me in benchmarking the differences, but I can imagine it's way more important for people with high refresh rate screens. But even without them, it makes the menus more responsive, so I suggest trying this out. That concludes everything that can be changed about the game. Now we can continue to the next section of this video, which is benchmarking all of the presets that the game has. There are some settings that will stay the same. Those are currently being shown on the screen. Of course, the benchmark is on the same map with almost the same conditions each time, so it fairly represents the performance you can expect. I will mention, however, that me recording the footage does slightly lower the performance, so try to compensate for that by adding around 5 to 10 FPS to each metric. So, without stalling this anymore, let's get to benchmarking.
I ran away from the light, compadres. Let's go.
Time to bind you. Caught with no way out.
Charging on my shields.
Please tie 5.
Giving my shields a recharge. Charging on my shields. Charging on my shields. Recharging shields.
And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. That's all from me. See ya.